Good morning. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral here in San Francisco, California. It's such a good blessing to see all of you today. Thank you very much for coming out so early in the morning. Today I'm joined by Miguel Bustos, who is the Senior Director for the Center for Social Justice at Glide, and a deacon, an amazing deacon at Grace Cathedral. He preached like 3 weeks ago on Evensong. I was moved by that sermon. Thank you. And we're also here with Dolores Huerta. Dolores is a workers' and civil rights hero and a feminist icon. She founded the Agricultural Workers Association and launched the National Farm Workers Association with César Chávez, now called the United Farm Workers of America. She was instrumental in the enacting of laws to protect workers and has worked to elect numerous candidates, including President Clinton, Governor Jerry Brown, Congresswoman Hilda Solis, and Hillary Clinton. While breaking down one gender barrier after another, she has also had a tremendous impact not only on farm worker women, but also young women everywhere. Dolores continues to work tirelessly developing leaders and advocating for the working poor, women, and children. As founder and president of the Dolores Huerta Foundation, she travels across the country engaging in campaigns and influencing legislation that supports equality and defends civil rights. Among the many recognitions and awards for her work, in 2012, President Obama bestowed upon her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian award in the United States. Miguel and I are thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to Dolores before she preaches today upstairs at the 11 o'clock a.m. Choral Eucharist service. Dolores and Miguel, thank you very much for joining us today. We've been looking forward to this so much, Dolores, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit, just as we get started, about what has changed over the course of your life. What is it important for young people to know about how things were when you were young?
Well, I think that what's changed, as everybody knows, is the world of social media, right?
Yeah.
Because that didn't exist, of course, when we were in our early organizing days. It was all very much one-on-one and trying to reach people. And the way that we organized it was trying to get groups of people together.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And the main thing is and what we do is literally empowering people to make them understand that they, not only that they have the power to make changes, but they have the obligation to make a better world for themselves and for their families and for their communities. And so I think that's what has changed. The other thing that we are right now in this critical time that we're in our society is that so many of the issues that we're facing were there,
Right.
but nobody talked about them.
Yes.
I mean, when I grew up, we just assumed that racism, sexism, homophobia, that was part of life,
Yeah.
you know? But nobody talked about it. It was like a no-no. So to see that all of this is out in the open and that we are really challenging and talking about these issues, and I know it's created a lot of chaos in our society, and we're at the position where people, you have to take sides, you know? Which side are you on? As they say in the labor movement, you know? Are you on the side of justice and compassion and caring, unity? Or are you on the side, I call them the haters, okay? The people that are out there just trying to punish everybody.
Yeah, that's right. And Jesus was very clear about that too. Are you going to be a person of compassion, or are you going to be a person who causes violence to the human soul?
Exactly.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about your childhood too. I would love to hear about what kind of kid you were. When you were in second grade, did your teachers know that you're going to grow up to be Dolores Huerta?
Well, actually, I was very shy as a child. And I have to attribute my passion for justice to my mother. I was born in the state of New Mexico.
Right.
It is a state, not a country.
Yeah.
And my mother was a lot of people in New Mexico, they're very devoted to St. Francis Xavier.
Yes,
and
right.
St. Francis of Assisi. And the whole idea that, as my mother would tell us when we were small, that you always had to help people. If you saw somebody that needed any kind of help, and if you had any ability to help them, that you had to do this, even if they didn't ask you.
Right.
If they didn't ask you for help, or you saw somebody that needed help, you had an obligation to help them. The other thing that she said is you do not take any kind of recognition or compensation, because if you do, then you take away the grace of God's, for doing that act of kindness or helping somebody. So I think those are very powerful messages for us.
Yeah, I can imagine just driving up the Central Valley and seeing all the workers in the fields and thinking about how can I help them, even though they may not have asked me to help yet.
Yes.
Miguel.
So Dolores, you, one, it's so great to have you here.
Thank you, Miguel.
God, I'm just in awe by you. During the farm worker movement in the 60s, you had such energy and such passion and compassion. Where did you get that from? Where did you find when the farm owners were bringing folks to beat you all up? Where did you find your faith in all that? When you knew what you were doing was right, and where was your God in all this? How did you reconcile? What did you think?
I think it even goes back further than that. When I made the decision to go to Delano to, help build a union, then that was a big decision for me because I was in the middle of a divorce. I had 7 children, as a single parent. I had a good job. I was teaching school, and when we started, César and I had decided to start the United Farm Workers, at that point it got to the point where he just couldn't do all the work by himself in Delano, and so he said, "You've got to come to Delano." And I thought about it, and this is really interesting because I thought, there's not going to be any wages, there's not going to be any salary. How am I going to feed my kids? And then at the same time, all my family thought that I was crazy for taking that action. But I had this calling, which I'm sure you have had, and many of us have had. Miguel, I know you've had that this is something that I had to do. And I had 2 signs. My oldest daughter was going to make her first communion, and I didn't have the money to buy her shoes. And when the children were coming down the aisle, and I thought I was just dreading the moment when my daughter was going to come because she had these white tennis shoes that had holes in them. Well, before I got to my daughter, there were these farm worker kids that had tennis shoes with holes in them. And I thought that was a sign. That was a sign.
Definitely.
The other thing, I didn't have a coat. And somebody, before I left Stockton to go to Delano, I got 4 coats. Different people offered me to give me coats, just out of the blue. And to me, these were signs that I was doing the right thing.
Yeah, and the people were with you. I mean, that you were being supported by people you cared about. I completely wonder about those early days. I mean, because that's a huge commitment to make and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your relationship with César Chávez and what made that partnership work and what were did you guys have frictions?
Many.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Well, we both came out of another organization called the Community Service Organization. And in fact, we had a chapter here in San Francisco. We had a chapter in Oakland. And that organization was started in the 50s. And it was basically based on getting people involved in voting. And we did that throughout the state of California. We set up many chapters. And that's where we got you might say, in that we were organized by a man named Fred Ross Sr.
Oh, yeah.
Who was here from the Bay Area. And Fred Ross is the one that taught us how to organize. And so we both worked in Los Angeles, and the Community Service Organization was supposed to support us to start a pilot program for farm workers, but then at the convention, they voted it down. So César and I and Mr. Ross, we all left the organization to start the United Farm Workers.
Yeah.
But, and so we had that history of working together in that organization. So, but it was kind of interesting looking back, and a lot of people say to me, well, as a woman, how did that work? But it was interesting because when we started the union, we made a lot of plans before we actually started. And one of the plans was to follow Mahatma Gandhi,
Right.
the whole idea of nonviolence. That was going to be our philosophy. But then César said to me, you know, one of us has to be the spokespersons for the organization. And he said, is it okay if I'm the spokesperson? And I said, okay. I say, looking back, if I had my feminist lens on, I would have said, no, it's got to be 50-50, okay? Yeah. But actually what happened is that when, of course, we had the strike, and then we started the boycott. And I was in New York City starting the great boycott, but people didn't know who César was. We had to introduce César to the public. So then I became the spokesperson.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so when you were the spokesperson, when he, how was it different? Like, what did you emphasize that he may not have emphasized? You know, if you had been the person, the 50-50 person, what would you have said that would have been different?
No, I think it would have been pretty much the same. Our message was very
same.
You know,
united message that you work together.
Yes, our message is that farm workers need help. You know, we need people to support the boycott, right?
Yeah, exactly. What were? So Miguel, do you have a question?
I was just on that tone. How did the other men, both the farm workers and the farm landowners and other organizers, feel about a woman, and how did they treat you?
I think it was hard for them, and not only the growers. That was interesting because when we would go into negotiations, I would have all the farm workers and me, and they were not used to that. They were used to having people pound the table and swear, and I didn't do that. But it was as a negotiator, you basically translate what the workers want and give it to the employers, right? So the workers are really the ones that say, this is what we need, this is what we want, right. And I would just bring it to the table for them.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But the one thing is that I think that the other leaders of the organization, they had problems. They just, I had more problems with the other men on the board, really, because I felt they were always undermining me. But the thing is that César did have a lot of faith in myself as a leader. It's like when we were working on the amnesty bill in Washington, D.C., we passed this big amnesty bill in 1986. So I was in Washington for 4 months trying to pass that bill. And all the time I was there, many other leaders were telling César, oh, Dolores is crazy, she's not going to be able to make it happen, But we did make it happen, and we got millions of people got their legalization status. But and then what they did is when I got back to the headquarters of the union, then they set up all these press conferences so they could all brag about getting the amnesty bill. And guess what? They sent me to Florida.
Oh, no.
And I should have said no, but I was not used to not taking assignments, right? We've got this big thing going on in Florida. And you know what? I remember spending Thanksgiving in an elder person's home. So there was that kind of stuff going on. And that was kind of good. And I want to say this to the women out there. And I know we have evolved a lot since that time. But you kind of just always kind of have to be careful, to kind of have your guard up there. Because you never know what the guys are going to try to do. There's a big light bulb going on above my head, and the light bulb is this. So there was a work that you were intending to do with United Farm Workers to have safer working conditions, to have better pay, to have more job security, to be able to organize. So that was kind of like part of the, but there was also other things that you were accomplishing at the same time. You were giving people a new picture of women's leadership roles. You were probably helping people to see women as effective decision makers in society. But I wonder what other kinds of things you were accomplishing that you may not have been thinking of as you were doing this organizing. Well, we did a lot of work on legislation.
Yeah,
and even starting with the community service organization, I can go really quick through about a dozen bills that we passed. This is back like in 1963. We passed a bill to get driver's licenses in Spanish, to get the voting ballots in Spanish. We passed, this is under CSO, even before United Farm Workers, we passed a bill that in California, you did not have to find a deputy registrar to register you to vote like they do in Texas. In Texas today, you can't register to vote unless you find a deputy registrar. So we changed that bill that anybody who was a citizen could register another person to vote.
Right.
That made a lot of difference in California. We passed a bill, a really important bill, that if you were a legal resident of the United States of America, not a citizen, a legal resident, you could get public service,
Right.
get public benefits, aid to the blind, aid to the disabled, old age pensions, but also aid to needy children. And right now we have millions of people, today that get that assistance throughout the United States. And I do have to mention a person here from San Francisco who was our champion, the great Phil Burton.
Oh, yeah.
The great Phil Burton, he was our champion.
Yeah.
And he's the one that made it possible to pass that law. And then in the United Farm Workers, we passed unemployment insurance for farm workers, the right to organize, unemployment insurance, which they didn't have before, toilets in the fields, okay?
Oh, I know, right.
So all over the United States of America, farm workers have toilets and hand washing facilities separate for men and for women.
Yeah.
And these are some of the legislation. And of course, the amnesty bill.
Right, exactly. And that was one of the questions I had for both you and Miguel. I mean, both of you in your careers have worked so closely with politicians, and I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about, what makes politicians different than the rest of us? That's the first question. And the second one is, what's shared? I mean, for one thing, they're much more likely to be a lawyer than so that's one question. The other question is just what advice do you have in terms of just working with politicians? For both of you.
Well, maybe I'll let Miguel go first.
Oh, no, that's hard. I've had the privilege and the honor to work for mayors, members of Congress, and a president and a vice president. There's a difference between a politician and a leader. And sometimes they're not the same person.
Yeah.
And yesterday, last night, and this morning, we were talking a little bit about that, about there are some leaders that happen to be politicians, but not all politicians are leaders. And I think being heartbroken and seeing some of that. Now, luckily, I think for me, I've had incredible bosses that were true leaders, and Barbara Lee, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, is definitely one of those. But also former Congressman Ron Dellums. I tell people when I worked for him, he taught me how to be a human being. So that's the stark difference sometimes.
Yeah, so your advice is be careful and be sure you know who you're talking to.
But also I think for politicians to remember, and it's up to us, that they are public servants, that they work for the people, not themselves. And I think we have to remind people of that it's okay to run for office, and we hope many people do, especially young activists, to run for office, but always remember why, I think, is important. Dolores.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that was a difference. I remember with Phil Burton, that people called him a commie, because he was always working for the people. But people like that they use their public office to go out there and help people. I remember when we were doing, trying to help the farm workers, and Phil Burton, he was in Sacramento. He was an assemblyman.
Yeah.
He was not even a senator. And he came down to Stockton without any authority except his own office, and with Cole Blease, who was he worked for the ACLU, or the Friends, I can't remember, the Friends Committee. And they came down and they had a hearing like this one right here, and they made all the growers in Stockton, all of the employers come together and have a hearing about the way that they were treating their workers. I mean, all of these, they were all scared, all scared. And he did it with no authority except just the authority of his office. And then what he did is he went to one of the labor camps to see how they were treating the farm workers. And all those farm workers got an instant raise, okay? Because during the hearings they were saying, no, this is how much we're paying our workers. And he didn't tell them that he was going. And so then he had one of our members of the CSO go with him. And before he got there, they were busy cleaning up the camp and everything, trying to make things look good. But it's that kind of authority that someone has. And so many politicians, we see that they cater to the lobbyists. Even right now today, we have a lot of people. A lot of us, I think, here are Democrats, I imagine, or independents. But we see that a lot of people that they say that they're Democrats, but once they get into office, they vote with the corporate powers and not for the poor people or the working people. And we all know what happened in Los Angeles recently, right?
Right.
Where we saw some people that we thought were okay that were not okay because of all of the comments that they made against, people of color, So.
Yeah, I don't know if you have any comments more about what happened in Los Angeles with the city council, Miguel, but I mean, I just even know what to say about it except that.
Yeah, I was appalled. Some of the folks we know, but there are more good people than there are bad. And
Yeah.
I believe that very much. And there's a lot of wonderful people in Los Angeles, like Hilda Solis and many others, that are doing the good work and building the bridges between Black and Brown and BIPOC communities.
Yeah, when politicians make their decisions, not about who am I going to help or how am I going to make things better, life better, but make the decisions of what will help me get elected, you know what I mean, for my next election, then you know that is a person who's not there for the people, but they're there for themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, that we really have to impress upon people, but when people get elected. Yeah, I'm on the board of the Consumer Federation, and we were going through all of the bills, and so many people that we think are okay voted against bills to help consumers.
Yeah.
Instead of saying we're going to vote for these bills because they will help people, but they don't, because they're thinking about who they're going to get money from. So I think the one thing that all of us can do to change this is to, as we say, take the money out of politics, but make it so. And you hardly hear any politicians talking about this, about having all campaign financing reform, so that the public, that we can pay for the campaigns instead of them having to get millions of dollars from rich people or the corporate interests, to get elected.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that is extraordinary about your record is just how much legislation you've had passed and how you've just changed the landscape of what it means to be in our society. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what advice you have for other people who are in this room who want to make changes to the laws of the land.
Well, I think we just have to get together and make it happen,
Yeah.
I've only heard one politician during this campaign season, a woman who's running for Congress up there in the Antelope Valley, Chrissy Smith. She's the only one that I've heard say we need campaign finance reform.
Yeah.
And it's something that really affects all of us, because the people that govern us are the ones that make the decisions, not only the resources that we're going to come into our communities, but all of the policies that they're going to engage in and to pass. So it's very, very important. I think it's part of a lot of the work that we do is, I call it Democracy 101, right? From right now, we have elections that are coming up, from making sure that people get out there and vote and do the canvassing to get good people elected. But that's like step one, or actually step two. Step one is the census. Getting people signed up for the census, so that then the redistricting to get districts so we can get the people that we want, so that people, especially people of color, can get the representation that they need. And then after that, of course, is voting, and then advocacy. Because once we get someone elected to office also, we have to stay on top of them to make sure they do the right thing,
Yeah. Miguel?
Dolores, you crisscross this country every week. You are, 1 minute you're in D.C., then you're in Texas, and then you're in New York, and then you're in Los Angeles, and this morning you're here in San Francisco. Where do you get your energy to do all that? Because flying, and then you're talking to different groups, and why do you do so much of that work?
Well, it's so important, everything that we're talking about here right now. We know that our country is in crisis right now. We have, I use the F word, fascism, okay?
Yeah.
That has really been here for a while, and we didn't quite recognize it. When we think of the people we have that are incarcerated in the United States, we have more people in prison here than they have in countries like India or China, even though those countries have billions of people in their population. and we only have millions, but yet somehow we have more people in prison than they do. So we know that this is something wrong with that picture, especially since the people in prison are black and brown and poor white people.
Yeah.
You know, so this is wrong. And now we see, and the word fascism comes from a German word, which means to punish and to torture. And so this is what we see has been happening, that you have these policies of hurting people, putting people in prison. In Texas, criminalizing women because they have abortions or miscarriages. You know, this constant idea that somehow we have to hurt people. And I think, and this is of course what religion is all about, is it, you know, helping people, right?
Right,
and having, as you said before, compassion. So this is this is what we're up against. And the one thing that we do know, the only ones that can stop this from happening in our country is us. We're the only ones that can do that. But a lot of people don't understand that they have the power to do this. You know, they somehow think we have to wait for someone else to do it. And this is the one thing that Fred Ross taught us. If we can make people understand that they have the power, and that only they have the power, but they've got to act on their power. And it doesn't mean that you have to have a high school diploma or a college diploma. It doesn't mean that you have to speak English or be a citizen. That every single person has the power to make things better.
Yeah.
That you can't wait for somebody from the outside to come and do it for you. And so this is what keeps me going. Because we have to just make people understand that they've got to get engaged, they've got to participate, because democracy doesn't work if you don't participate. And so we just say there's more people that we need to talk to, right?
Right. You know, I think about there must have been just days when it just seemed like you were never going to be successful in the early days of the organization.
I never thought that.
That's good. You're always hopeful. Always hopeful. But tell us a little bit about one of those, like kind of what gave you hope during those days, and why you felt so confident that your way would.
Well, I think you're just believing in people, and believing in the power of people.
Yeah.
That's what makes you confident. And you always have setbacks, you know. But I always thought whenever we had a big setback, you know, like when the Teamsters came in and we had people that were killed and everything. That you just know that you had to find another way. You know,
exactly.
You have to have that faith.
Yeah.
Faith in yourselves, you know, faith in people, faith in God. That you can succeed.
And I know that there are times when it was just like you were in danger physically too. And I wonder if you can talk about just kind of the sources of your courage and how you're able to get through those terrible times.
Well, I remember there was a book back in the 60s. Maybe Olga will remember that book, The Yaku Way of Knowledge, that all of us read that book. And there was one line in that book that stuck with me. It says, when you take the warrior path, you're going to have arrows that are going to be slung at you, okay? Yeah. So we know that that's kind of the price. Like, again, when I left my home in Stockton to come to Delano, my relatives pretty much disowned me, you know, because they thought that I was crazy, you know, taking my kids down there, not knowing where my next meal was going to be coming from. But those are kind of the things that you have to expect. But again, my mother told me, growing up, she said, when people criticize you or make fun of you or attack you, as long as you know that you're doing the right thing, just ignore them, okay?
Yeah.
Just ignore them. Yeah, and that really helped me a lot.
Yeah.
You know, Dolores, a good mutual friend, Peter Bratt, did a movie on you called Dolores. Mm-hmm. If you haven't seen it, see it. It's a wonderful documentary about your life. And you talked a lot about in that, and there was comments from your kids that they sacrificed a lot of their mother because their mother was doing such incredible work. Do you think now, what would be the best lesson that you feel that you've been able not only to share with your kids, but also younger generations about that sometimes there is that sacrifice that has to be made?
Well, when we think of sacrifices, when you're doing movement work, as you know, and many of you here know, that basically what you're sacrificing is your time. And we know time is the most precious resource that we have. So when you are giving of your time to work for others, I mean, this is, and so in a way you might say it's a sacrifice. Maybe you're sacrificing material wealth or material goods, you know, because you're giving your time to help others instead of making money, so to speak, you know. So I guess sometimes I think that maybe selfishly, what I deprived my children of a lot of the things that I didn't have. You know, growing up in a middle-class home, my mother was a businesswoman, so I had the music lessons and the dancing lessons, and you know, was a Girl Scout. I had all these wonderful privileges, which my children did not have. But then again, the children of farm workers didn't have those privileges either, you know, and so that I think that's in a way you might say. I did what I love to do. If anybody sacrificed, it was my children, you know. But then I think they had experiences growing up that probably they never could have fabricated in any other way because they lived them, you know.
So true.
So it was kind of a trade-off.
Yeah.
And my children grew up in poverty, but they're very, very strong kids. And, you know, my oldest son is a medical doctor. My other son, Emilio's an attorney, whom you know. My daughter Angela's a nurse, oncology nurse. My daughter Juanita was a teacher. She's come to work with our foundation now. So those, you know, the kids, they all turn out great, pretty great.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
my daughter Lori, who I think is here with me in the back there. Lori works for our foundation, and she's right now in charge of all of our archives. And we're gonna have a hologram, okay? A holograph? Is it a holograph? I say it wrong. So it's like a 3D image of myself.
Oh, yeah, right.
And so there will be life after death. And Lori's the one that's been working on that to make that happen.
So that's great. That's great. And you're right. I mean, every child grows up in a family, and some like love whatever their family and some, and it's, you know, kids adjust to that. You know, one of the traditions we have at Grace Cathedral is we take questions, little note cards. So Rebecca will be handing out little cards for you. But you know, one of the things that you've had to do so many times is speak in public in different kinds of settings. And I wonder what advice do you have for public speakers, just in terms of what you've learned in terms of just preparing and delivering messages like that.
Well, I think you try to reach the audience, and I know this is a very liberal audience, you know, and so many of you are activists, so you kind of have lived the life that I'm talking about, right? And we're very grateful to you, by the way, for doing all that. And we wish that we could have you come down to the Central Valley, okay? Because down there we're more like Alabama, you know, than we are like San Francisco, and the changes that we're trying to. In fact, just this last week, at our community college, there was an organization called the Liberty Institute that was trying to get our community college to not teach anything about César Chávez or the farm workers.
Wow.
This is in the Central Valley of California, right there where The Grapes of Wrath was filmed, you know, where John Steinbeck wrote about the farm workers there. They were trying to get this passed at our community college.
Yeah. You know, that's one effect that we've seen from Donald Trump, the presidential administration. I wonder if you can talk about other things that you've noticed in terms of how the landscape has changed in the last 6 years.
Well, like I mentioned before, this is what our big fight is right now. When you have people like Governor DeSantis saying that they're anti-woke, that's pro-ignorance.
Yeah, you know? Right. You're right, that's right.
Yeah, you know, against education. And the idea that they want to keep people in ignorance is the way that we keep people divided, right?
Yeah.
You know, keeping people fighting against each other. And I always like to quote this philosopher, Jose Ortega y Gasset. He was in Spain before the Franco regime. And he wrote a book called The Revolution of the Masses. And this book, it's a small book, 100 pages, but his thesis of the book was this: if you do not have an educated citizenry, then the corrupt, the powerful, and the greedy will rule. And so that is what the fight that we have right now in our country. Yeah. You know, who is going to govern? Who's going to rule? Is it going to be the people or the corrupt, the powerful, and the greedy? And the cultural wars, as they call them, the anti-gay, anti-women's reproductive rights, you know, like anti-immigrants, you know, this is just to make people be divided.
Yeah.
And I know everybody here in this audience is woke, as they say, but I do like to say to, especially our Latino community, because this is one of the issues that they use to divide the Latino community in terms of women's right to abortion. And I say this as a mother of 11 children, is that, and I like to quote Benito Juarez. Benito Juarez was a great president of Mexico, and he had a saying, and I'll say it in Spanish, el respeto al derecho ajeno es la paz, respecting other people's rights is peace. And if, how many children a woman wants to have, or not have, that is their human right. Who you love, who you live with, who you marry, if it happens to be someone of your own sex, that is your human right, okay? So please share that with people that you know that might be confused on the issue, okay?
That's right. Yeah, and God wants us to thrive, and that's the way human beings thrive, and that's the way we care for each other. Miguel.
I just wanted, Dolores, you brought up the issues of women's reproductive rights, LGBT individuals and their rights. You talked about slavery. I'm so proud to be part of a faith tradition, especially under the dean's leadership, where we've talked about these issues from the pulpit. And I'm just grateful to be part of this community of grace and this faith tradition that really believes in exactly what you're talking about. So you preaching today is like spot on.
It is. We're so excited about that. But yeah, the dignity of every human being comes from God. So we have some questions. You know what, I better put some glasses on, otherwise you can hold it too if you want. Yeah. Okay. What exactly do you say when you're negotiating with bosses or politicians to get them to agree to your position?
Well, you try to give them rational reasons, the reasons why people need cold drinking water in the fields, bathrooms. Would you believe that you have to give them a reason? But I remember in one negotiations when one of the employers said, well, farm workers don't know how to use a bathroom. Would you believe that they said that?
That's terrible.
I mean, yeah. So you give them, but then the other thing that you have to do with both politicians and employers, like we did with the grape growers, put the boycott on them, right? So they weren't getting any money for their grapes or their lettuce, and then they had to sign contracts. And with politicians, you have to do the same thing. You have to put the heat on them, get letters, do demonstrations, whatever it needs, make them understand that they can lose their next election. And then they understand. With the employers, you might say that their heart is in their wallet, okay? With the politicians, they always worry whether they're going to get reelected. So you have to send them emails, letters, demonstrations, do sit-ins. When we were trying to get, people don't know this, but we have the Affordable Care Act, but it only passed with about 5 votes in the Congress. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
And some of those people were here in California. And so we had to come in there and do picket lines, sit-ins, and we ended up doing a fast. We had over 500 people fasting to get our local politicians in the Central Valley, 2 of them were Democrats, to pass the Affordable Care Act. So it's just about putting the pressure on them.
I got a message from our tech crew that I have to put your microphone on your ear.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm such a good listener. They tell me what to do, and I just do it.
Well, we can.
You can use the handheld, too. I'll put that there until... Okay.
You can use it.
Great. All right. What did President Obama say when he awarded you the Presidential Medal of Freedom? And did Michelle Obama say something as well?
Well, the president said... and when I first met Obama, the first thing he said to me was, I stole your slogan. He said, I stole your slogan. And I said, yes, you did.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Oh, thank you.
And then he repeated that when I got the Medal of Freedom.
How do you speak to less liberal audiences, and how do you engage with the right wing of politics?
Well, I think with the people that are not like you try to explain to them. For instance, I remember speaking at a Mormon church once and explaining to them again about women's rights and about the rights of LGBTQ people. And since they had to sit there and listen to me, right? They couldn't do anything. I don't know if they were happy or not, but you have to use that occasion, to be able to, again, bring some light into their minds. As we say in Spanish, sometimes people are tapados, they're not enlightened yet. They're not educated.
And there is a power that truth just has, and that's part of the power of your speaking.
And I want to say that to everybody too, because we have to use those, whatever that we know, and we know that people that are not with us yet, but we have to try to educate them. And sometimes it creates uncomfortable situations, but sometimes you have to have a little bit of conflict to make changes. So we shouldn't just wait to be called on. But if you know that somebody isn't quite there yet in terms of their humanity, then we should become the messengers of justice. We should become the messengers of peace and try to spread that message. And sometimes we say, well, maybe I'll lose that friendship. But you'd be surprised that sometimes people that are, say, very racist or homophobic or whatever, but you plant that seed.
Yeah.
You plant that seed, and eventually they'll get the message.
Yeah, definitely. So here's another message. Beloved Dolores Huerta, muchos gracias. During these sweet 16 days before the midterms, please give us your advice and our prayers for all of us to take action for the good. So 16 days before the midterms, what advice do you have?
Well, I just want to invite everybody to come out there and knock on doors, okay? Please, please. And if somebody want to come down to the Central Valley, we have a couple of tough races there. The whole nation is looking to see what's happening down there in Bakersfield, California, because the House of Representatives is so close right now. We know they're predicting that we're going to be able to take the Senate for the Democrats. And I know this is an nonpartisan. This is just information, okay? Yeah. But because we have so many of the people that are running for the U.S. Senate that are kind of, I'm going to call them idiots, right? And so they think that Senate is going to be okay. But the House of Representatives is, of course, where it's kind of iffy. And we have some of those races are right here in California.
Yeah, right.
They're really kind of hoping that we can get some of the Congress people out of California. So if people want to come down to the Central Valley, Bakersfield, if you haven't been to Bakersfield recently, we'd love to have you come down there, okay? And it is getting cooler. A little cooler. But this is how I got my start.
Yeah.
The first thing, after Fred Ross organized us in Stockton, the first thing we did was go out and knock on doors to get people to register to vote, to get people to vote. So I think this is what we have to do. Make sure that we get people out to vote.
There you go.
So please, I hope that you can give some of your time to do that.
I see why we stopped using these microphones.
My ears are too big.
No. So many people today are not supporting democracy. What are ways we can reach them, especially when they often hear totally different messages? Yeah, that is part of it. Yeah.
Well,
Let me just leave this hang down like that.
well, we know, I think when we think of fascism, we know how that ended up in Germany, right? Where millions of Jews were killed. And we know and not just Jews, disabled people, gypsies, other people, LGBT people. So we know how that ends. And so somehow we have to make people understand that, again, that fascism is about hurting people. And that we've got to be about helping people, about helping the homeless, helping the disabled, helping our immigrants. And that's who we are. And again, and we have to remind people, and I love to say to people, Google a map of the United States before 1848. And what you will find is that a third of the United States was Mexico. Right now we have a lot of talk about what Russia is doing in Ukraine. Well, the United States took half of Mexico, 50% of Mexico became the United States of America, And so when people think about, this hostility that we have against immigrants, we have to remind people the true immigrants that came to the United States, like my great-grandmother who came from Spain, and my other great-grandfather who came from England, by the way, they were the true immigrants, right? Europeans are the true immigrants to the United States. The native people here, both North America and South America, are the indigenous people. And these are the people that are at our borders trying to get asylum from poverty, or violence. But we have to remember that the United States of America, we are responsible for the poverty in Central America, because, and I like to use the word bananas, okay? How many bananas do we eat in the United States in one day? Does the money that we pay for the bananas go to the people of Guatemala or El Salvador? No. Honduras? No. It goes to United Fruit Company. It goes to Dole Banana. It goes to the 50 banana companies. It does not go to the people that produce the bananas or the coffee, that we drink every day, okay? And that has to change. And again, the only way that we can change that is by electing people to our Congress that will make that change, make it happen. So, again, the power is with the people.
Yeah, exactly.
And to understand that we have that power to make those policy changes in the world.
Yeah. What were you doing during COVID, and what do you think we learned from COVID as a society?
Well, I think the one thing that we should have learned is that we are a global community, that we are one human race, and that we have to protect each other. And if we don't, then our human race is you might say, challenged or threatened, just like we now see with global warming. If we don't work together in harmony, that everybody gets hurt.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned earlier was that you've had 11 children. I wonder if you have any advice for people who are just becoming parents now, in terms of just how they raise their kids.
Well, I think, especially for women, that we have to fight for universal daycare, okay? I mean, that's the main thing that parents need, is somebody to help us watch our children. As Hillary Clinton says, it takes a village to raise a child, And we can remember that, too. And again, getting into our curriculums at the elementary school level, the idea that we're one human race. And I do like to say this, to remind everybody that our human race began in Africa. We only have one human race. We have a lot of different ethnic groups. I think Africa has like 52 ethnic groups. Yeah. I know in Latin America we have a lot of ethnic groups. The people from Jalisco and the people from Peru are very different from the people in Oaxaca, Mexico, for instance, And if we can teach that to everyone so that way we can get rid of racism once and for all. In fact, let me do this for a second. Take the hand of the person next to you. Turn to that person and say, hello, relative. Okay, and that will remind us that we're one human race, and yes, we all came from Africa, okay? Just remember that.
What about the thing, like as you look back on all these decades of involvement in the democratic experiment, what are some of the things that you're most proud of as you look back at your life?
Well, I think I am grateful, and I think I have been blessed. And this is a great thing, and I know a lot of you already know this. I know what Olga Talamantes went through in her life, that when you become an activist, and you know that you're helping change things, and let me say this too. César Chávez once said to a student, he was trying to get him to recruit him, and he said, when you go to school, you learn history, you read about history, you talk about history, you study history, But when you become an activist, you make history, okay? You make history, okay? When you become an activist, you go on that journey, on that path, and so many incredible things happen.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes good things, sometimes bad things, but you learn from everything. But you know when you're on that path that you are making history, that you are changing the world, and that your power as an individual is making that happen. And you might say that that's God's power, right?
Yeah, it is.
Is making that happen. I think that's the most incredible thing that I think I can share with everybody. And I know many of you here have lived that, and I know that you agree with what I'm saying, because then it becomes, and whatever problems one has in your own life, and I know I had many of those, you kind of don't focus on those problems, because when you're out there helping people or changing, making things better for others, then somehow that becomes the dominant force in your life.
Yeah.
And these other problems, they take care of themselves one way or the other eventually.
Yeah, that's such good advice. I think there's a way in which we can obsess about our own life and be so involved in our own thoughts and moods. And there is a cure for that, which is care for other people. I wonder what signs of hope you see these days as you look around the scene and as you look at society today.
Well, I'm going to share some. But a friend of mine told me that he was talking to the Dalai Lama, and he asked the Dalai Lama, "Do you ever think that there will be peace in the world?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Really? Why and how?" He said, "The internet." But I want to add to that. The other reason I see hope is when I see that we are getting more women elected to office, okay? Coretta Scott King said that we will never have peace in the world until women take power. And I think that also helps when we think about
great.
that.
Yeah,
so we do see the changes that are happening.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't just say the word women, because we know some women out there are also on the hater side. But when we see, and I like to use the word feminists instead of women, because feminists care about people, they care about immigrants, etc. And so we know that a lot of men are feminists too, like the men in this room. Let's give them an applause.
No, I just, you these last few, when did you start the Dolores Huerta Foundation, and why, and where do you want it seen to where it should go in the future?
Well, actually, I left the United Farm Workers in the year 2002. And before Cesar passed away, we had talked about going back to the community organizing that we did in the CSO, the Community Service Organization. And so in the union, I felt that we had all of the laws that we needed in place, and the structure was built. We had, the law at the state level, the agricultural labor relations law, and I felt that there's so much work that needs to be done in the community. So, and I was very fortunate because I got a grant from the Poppin Foundation of $100,000. So I used that to start the Dolores Huerta Foundation. And we're going to celebrate our 20th anniversary next year. And right now we are working in 4 different counties, part of Los Angeles County, the Antelope Valley, and most of our work there is working with homeless people. Then we're also in Kern County, Bakersfield, in Fresno County, and Tulare County. So we're in those 4 counties. We have about 51 full-time staff, everybody, right now. And then we have about right now, I'm going to say about maybe almost 90 people that are canvassing for the election in these 4 different areas. We have a big youth program. We have a big health program. We have vaccinated over 8,000 people against COVID. We've had over 100 clinics, so we have clinics every single weekend on COVID. We have a big education program. We sued the Kern High School District because they had expelled over 2,000 black and brown students in 1 year. And then we got that down from 2,000 to less than 21 expulsions, okay? So that was a big one. We're active in 17 different school districts, covering over 200 schools, and about over 40% of the recommendations that we have made, the school districts have adopted them. And of course, we doing a lot of work on redistricting. All of our maps that we introduced to the Independent Commission, they were adopted in total. Okay, in total. We have we're doing on the civic education work. We're doing a lot of work on that. And one of our staff is here. In fact, two of our staff. Carlo Gomez is here, who works with our foundation. And my daughter, I mentioned her before, Lori De Leon, who's there in the back. She also works for our foundation. So.
I mean, it's hard to believe, but our time has run out. You're going to be preaching a sermon from the pulpit at Grace Cathedral soon. We have to give you a little bit of time to prepare. But thank you so much for being with us. On Wednesday night, November 2nd at 5 p.m., in the last forum of the fall season, I will be talking online with Dr. Cornel West about democracy, race, religion, and as he puts it, living and loving out loud. You're very welcome to join us at the 11 o'clock service upstairs. Dolores was preaching today. We rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. You can give online at gracecathedral.org or by texting THINK, T-H-I-N-K, to 76278. 76278. And thank you so much, Miguel and Dolores, for a wonderful morning. We'll remember so much of the things that you said today, and we feel so encouraged by your ministry and society. Thank you very much.
And before we close, could we ask everybody to stand up for a minute? And then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, okay? And I know you know the answer. The first question I'm going to ask you who's got the power. I want you to say, we've got the power. Now I'm going to say, what kind of power? I want you to say, people power, all right? And can they shout it out loud?
Yeah, they definitely can.
All right, let's go. Who's got the power?
We've got the power.
Okay, some people aren't sure. Let's do it one more time. Who's got the power?
We've got the power.
What kind of power?
People power.
Are we going to use our power to make this a better world? What do we say? ¿Se puede o no se puede? All right, that means yes, we can. Okay, let's do it with an organized hand clap, everybody. Let's go. Sí, se. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Olga. Thank you.
Thank you so much.